I handed my son the house keys on his wedding day, tears of joy streaming down my face. His new wife leaned close and whispered 5 chilling words. "Now she's officially out." I smiled, pretending I didn't hear. But months later, the new owners tore open the walls and found something that would destroy her completely. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. My name is Celine, and I'm 67 years old. If you saw me on the street, you'd probably see just another elderly woman with silver hair and tired eyes. But behind these wrinkles is a story of sacrifice, love, and betrayal that nearly destroyed me. For 40 years, I poured everything I had into that house on Maple Street. Not just money, but my heart, my soul, my entire existence. Every floorboard, every coat of paint, every flower in the garden represented a piece of my life. Let me take you back so you understand who I was before everything fell apart. I became a widow when I was only 35 years old. My husband James died in a construction accident, leaving me alone with our 8-year-old son, Marcus. One moment I had a partner, a future, a plan. The next moment I had funeral bills, a mortgage, and a terrified little boy who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I had no college degree, no career, no safety net. What I had was determination and a mother's love that could move mountains. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. During the day, I waited tables at a diner where truckers left decent tips if you smiled through the exhaustion. At night, I scrubbed floors at County General Hospital, my knees aching, my hands raw from industrial cleaners. On weekends, I cleaned houses for wealthy families who never bothered to learn my name. I never remarried. I never dated. I never took a vacation or bought myself anything that wasn't absolutely necessary. Every single dollar went into 2 things: keeping that house and raising my son. Marcus was my world. I attended every parent-teacher conference, even if it meant losing sleep. I baked cookies for his school events using the cheapest ingredients I could find. I sewed his Halloween costumes by hand because store-bought ones were too expensive. When he wanted to play Little League, I worked extra shifts to afford the registration fee. When he got accepted to college, I took out loans I'm still paying off. I gave him everything, because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice. We endure. We love without condition. The house on Maple Street became more than just walls and a roof. It was proof that I'd survived. It was Marcus's childhood, his stability, his foundation. It was the garden where James had planted tomatoes the summer before he died, still growing wild every year, like his spirit refusing to leave us. It was the kitchen where I'd taught Marcus to bake his grandmother's lemon pound cake. It was the living room, where we'd laughed over photo albums and cried during sad movies. It was home in the truest sense of the word. So when Marcus called me 6 months ago, his voice full of excitement, telling me he was engaged to Victoria, a successful real estate agent, I was overjoyed. Finally, my boy had found love. Finally, he'd have the partner I'd never been able to find for myself. I thought I was gaining a daughter. I thought our family was growing. I decided to give them the ultimate wedding gift, the house itself, fully paid off, worth nearly $500,000. I thought it would be their foundation, their security, their future. I thought it would keep me close to my son forever, that maybe I'd become a grandmother in those same beloved rooms. I had no idea I was signing away everything to a woman who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. Life before the engagement announcement was simple, predictable, and beautiful in the way that quiet lives often are. I'd wake up every morning at 6 o'clock, not because I had to anymore, but because my body had been trained by decades of early shifts. The first thing I'd do was open the curtains in my bedroom, letting the sunrise spill across the hardwood floors that James had installed with his own hands 30 years ago. I'd run my fingers along the windowsill, remembering how he'd measured everything twice, determined to get it perfect for our family. My mornings had a sacred rhythm. I'd shuffle into the kitchen in my worn slippers, the ones Marcus had given me 5 Christmases ago, and start the coffee maker. While it gurgled and hissed, I'd step out onto the back porch, breathing in the morning air and surveying my garden. That garden was my pride and joy. The tomato plants that James had originally planted still returned every summer, their descendants spreading across the same patch of earth. I'd added roses along the fence line, lavender near the porch steps, and a small herb garden that I used for cooking. My hands, rough and scarred from years of hard labor, had grown gentle again through the simple act of nurturing living things. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor of 23 years, would usually be out on her porch around the same time. We'd wave to each other, sometimes chat across the fence about the weather or whose grandchildren were visiting. She'd known Marcus since he was a boy, had watched him grow up, had brought casseroles when James died. These small daily connections were the fabric of my life, quiet threads that held everything together. By mid-morning, I'd usually be baking something. The kitchen would fill with the warm scent of lemon pound cake or chocolate chip cookies, recipes passed down from my mother that I'd made hundreds of times. I'd always make extra to bring to the senior center where I volunteered twice a week, reading to residents who'd lost their vision or simply needed company. My own struggles had taught me that loneliness could be more painful than poverty, so I tried to be the friend I'd needed during those darkest years after James died. Afternoons were for small projects around the house. I'd dust the family photos lining the hallway, pausing to smile at pictures of Marcus through the years. His first day of kindergarten, gap-toothed and nervous. His high school graduation, tall and proud in his cap and gown. His college acceptance letter clutched in his hands, both of us crying with joy. Every photograph was a testament to our journey together, proof that we'd made it despite everything. Sunday dinners with Marcus were the highlight of my week. He'd arrive around 4 o'clock, usually bringing wine or flowers, and we'd cook together in the kitchen where I'd taught him to crack eggs and knead dough as a child. We'd talk about his work as an accountant, his dreams of eventually starting his own firm, his life in the city. He'd tell me about the woman he'd started dating, Victoria, describing how sophisticated and ambitious she was. I'd listen, thrilled that he'd found someone, already imagining her joining our Sunday tradition. In the evenings, I'd sit on the porch swing James had built, watching the neighborhood settle into darkness. Lights would flicker on in windows. Children would be called inside for dinner. Dogs would bark in distant yards. Everything felt safe, familiar, eternal. I'd look at my house, at the life I'd built from ashes and grief, and feel something close to contentment. I truly believed the best chapters were still ahead. I believed Marcus and I would only grow closer as he started his own family. I believed this home would shelter generations, that my future grandchildren would play in the same yard where their father had learned to ride a bike. I never imagined that everything I'd built could be stolen with a signature and a smile. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late April, 2 weeks before the wedding, when the first crack appeared in my perfect picture of the future. I was in the garden, kneeling in the dirt with my hands deep in the soil, planting new marigolds along the border. I was wearing my old gardening apron, the one with faded sunflowers printed on it, dirt under my fingernails, my hair pulled back in a messy bun. I was happy, lost in the simple pleasure of working with the earth, thinking about how beautiful the garden would look for Marcus and Victoria when they moved in after the honeymoon. I heard a car door slam and looked up to see Victoria's sleek black BMW parked in my driveway. She stepped out wearing a crisp white blazer and designer sunglasses, looking like she'd just come from a business meeting. I waved, surprised, but pleased by the unexpected visit. "Victoria! What a lovely surprise. I wasn't expecting you today." She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hi, Celine. I hope you don't mind me dropping by. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd take another look at the house. Really start visualizing our furniture placement and design plans." Of course. Come in, please. Let me just wash my hands." I hurried inside, rinsing the dirt from my fingers, feeling suddenly self-conscious about my appearance. Victoria always looked so polished, so put together, and there I was looking like I'd been digging ditches. When I came back into the living room, Victoria was already walking through the house, with her phone out, taking photographs of everything. Not casual snapshots, but deliberate, methodical photos. She'd photograph a wall, then step back and photograph the entire room from a different angle. She moved through each space with the focus of someone conducting an inspection, not the warmth of someone imagining their future home. "The crown molding is original, isn't it?" she asked, running her finger along the decorative trim near the ceiling. "Yes. James installed most of it himself. He was so proud of the craftsmanship. He said homes don't have character like this anymore." Victoria murmured, typing something into her phone. "And these hardwood floors, what year were they refinished?" "Oh, about 15 years ago. They're solid oak, very durable. They've held up beautifully." She crouched down, examining the floorboards closely, taking more pictures. Then she moved to the windows, testing the locks, checking the frames. "When was the house last appraised?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. "Appraised? Well, I'm not sure exactly. Maybe 10 years ago when I refinanced. Why do you ask?" "Just curious about the value. For insurance purposes, you know." She smiled again, that same cold smile. "Are there any liens on the property? Any outstanding debts or claims?" "No, nothing like that. The house is paid off completely. That's why I wanted to give it to you both, so you'd start your marriage with no debt, with security." I felt proud saying it, remembering all those years of sacrifice that had led to this moment. "And you have the original deed? All the paperwork is in order?" "Yes, of course. Everything's filed away safely. Victoria, is something wrong? These questions seem so formal." She laughed, waving her hand dismissively. "Oh, Celine, don't be silly. I'm just being thorough. It's the real estate agent in me. I can't help but think about property details. I just want to make sure everything is perfect for Marcus and me." But her words felt rehearsed, and her eyes kept scanning the rooms with incalculating coldness that made my stomach tighten. She wasn't looking at the house the way a bride looks at her future home. She was looking at it the way an appraiser evaluates a commodity. When she finally left, I stood in the hallway surrounded by all the family photos on the walls. Marcus as a baby in James's arms, Marcus's first day of school, our camping trips to the lake, birthday parties and Christmas mornings. Memories layered upon memories. I felt something I couldn't quite name, something that made my hands tremble slightly as I locked the door behind her. It was the feeling you get when you realize something is slightly wrong, but you can't quite identify what it is. Like when you walk into a room and sense someone has been going through your things, even though everything appears to be in place. I shook my head, scolding myself for being paranoid. She's just a detail-oriented person, I thought. She's probably stressed about the wedding. Every bride gets anxious before the big day. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Victoria's face as she photographed my home, professional and detached, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd been cataloging assets rather than dreaming about her future. The week leading up to the wedding became a blur of increasingly strange moments that I desperately tried to convince myself meant nothing. Marcus had always been attentive, calling me at least 3 times a week, stopping by on Sundays without fail. But suddenly he became a ghost. When I called him, he'd answer with clipped, one-word responses. "Yeah, busy. Later, Mom." Then he'd hang up before I could ask any real questions or share any excitement about the upcoming celebration. I told myself it was normal. Grooms get nervous. Planning a wedding is stressful. He probably had a million things on his mind. The tuxedo fitting, the rehearsal dinner arrangements, the honeymoon plans. I made excuses for every cold interaction, every unreturned call, every canceled visit. On Wednesday evening, I called my sister Clara, the only family I had left besides Marcus. Clara lived in Arizona with her husband, and though we didn't see each other often, we talked regularly. I needed to hear her voice, needed her to tell me I was overthinking things. "Clara, does Marcus seem distant to you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light and casual. distant. Celine, the boy's getting married in 4 days. He's probably running around like a chicken with its head cut off. You know how weddings are, controlled chaos. She laughed warmly. Remember when Sarah got married? Tom barely slept for a week before the ceremony. I suppose you're right, I said, wanting desperately to believe her. It's just that Victoria came by the other day, and she was asking all these strange questions about the house. Legal questions. Questions about appraisals and liens. Well, she's a real estate agent, isn't she? That's probably just her professional brain working. Some people can't turn off work mode, you know. My neighbor's a dentist, and she's always commenting on people's teeth at parties. Clara chuckled. Celine, sweetheart, I think you're just nervous about the changes coming. It's natural. You're not losing a son, you're gaining a daughter. Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. A life raft I could cling to in my sea of doubt. You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm being silly and oversensitive. Of course I'm right. I'm your older sister, Clara said with affection. Now stop worrying and focus on enjoying the wedding. Your baby boy is getting married. This should be a happy time. After we hung up, I stood in Marcus's old bedroom, surrounded by boxes of his childhood belongings that I'd been organizing for the move. I ran my fingers over his Little League trophies, his high school yearbooks, the model airplanes we'd built together on rainy Saturdays. Every object was a memory, proof of the bond we shared. I convinced myself that Victoria's questions were innocent, just her analytical mind at work. I convinced myself that Marcus's distance was temporary wedding stress. I convinced myself that once the ceremony was over, everything would return to normal. Better than normal, because I'd have a daughter-in-law and eventually grandchildren to love. I started imagining the future again, painting over my doubts with hopeful fantasies. I pictured Victoria and me becoming close, maybe going shopping together or having lunch dates. I pictured holidays with the whole family gathered around my dining table, Marcus carving the turkey, Victoria laughing at my stories, children playing on the floor. I pictured growing old, surrounded by love, finally reaping the rewards of all those years of sacrifice. I even started planning how I'd decorate the guest room in whatever small apartment I'd rent nearby. I'd make it cozy and welcoming so Marcus and Victoria would want to visit often. Maybe I'd get a cat for company. Maybe I'd finally take that pottery class I'd always wanted to try. Change could be good. Change could be an adventure. Victoria's whispered comment at the reception, "Now she's officially out." That should have been my wake-up call. But I wasn't ready to hear it yet. I wasn't ready to believe that the son I'd sacrificed everything for could betray me. I wasn't ready to accept that the generous gift I'd planned could be my biggest mistake. So I did what so many people do when faced with uncomfortable truths. I looked away. I made excuses. I smiled and pretended everything was fine because the alternative, accepting that something was terribly wrong, was too painful to bear. I told myself that love conquers all, that family bonds are unbreakable, that my years of devotion had earned me loyalty and respect. I told myself that the knot in my stomach was just anxiety about living alone for the first time in decades, not intuition screaming that I was walking into a trap. I told myself everything would be okay, even as the evidence mounted that nothing would ever be okay again. The wedding reception was held at the Riverside Country Club, an elegant venue with crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. I wore my best dress, a simple navy blue gown I'd bought on sale, and tried to blend into the background while Victoria's wealthy family dominated the celebration. Her parents had paid for everything, making sure everyone knew it. I felt small and out of place among the designer suits and expensive jewelry, but I kept smiling because this was Marcus's day. I'd been nursing a glass of champagne, watching my son dance with his new bride, when my bladder reminded me I'd had too much coffee that morning. I excused myself from the table where I'd been sitting with distant relatives I barely knew and made my way toward the restrooms down a quiet corridor away from the main ballroom. The hallway was dimly lit and peaceful, a welcome escape from the loud music and forced conversations. I was almost to the bathroom when I heard Victoria's voice coming from a partially open door, a coat room or storage area. She was on her phone, her tone completely different from the sweet, gracious bride voice she'd been using all evening. "Don't worry about it. The old lady signed everything over last week," Victoria said with a harsh laugh that made my blood freeze. "The house is officially ours. Well, mine and Marcus's. We can list it next month once she's settled somewhere else." I stopped walking, my hand hovering over the bathroom door handle. My heart began to pound so loudly I was afraid she'd hear it. "Marcus says she's already looking at apartments across town," Victoria continued. "Some dingy little place she can afford on her Social Security. Once she's gone and we have the house empty, we'll stage it properly and flip it for at least $600,000, maybe more. The neighborhood's gentrifying fast. These old-timers have no idea what their properties are actually worth." My legs felt weak. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to steady myself. "She has absolutely no idea what's happening." Victoria laughed again, cruel and triumphant. "She thinks we're going to live there, raise kids there, keep all her precious memories alive. It's pathetic, really." Marcus felt guilty at first, but I explained the financial reality. That house is our nest egg, our investment opportunity. Why would we live in some outdated relic when we could have something modern downtown? There was a pause as whoever was on the other end of the call spoke. "No, she won't fight it. She's too grateful, too naive. She actually cried when she signed the deed over. Tears of joy," she said. Victoria's voice dripped with contempt. "These old people are so easy to manipulate. You just appeal to their emotions, talk about family and legacy, and they hand over everything without thinking twice." I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred with tears. Every word was a knife stabbing into my chest, twisting deeper with each revelation. The bathroom was forgotten. The reception was forgotten. Everything except Victoria's words echoed in my skull. "She has absolutely no idea. So easy to manipulate. Pathetic." I stumbled backward, pressing my fist against my mouth to keep from crying out. My other hand found the wall, steadying me as the hallway seemed to tilt and spin. I somehow made it through the rest of the reception, moving like a ghost through fog. I watched Marcus kiss his bride. I smiled when people congratulated me. I cut the cake and posed for photos, but inside I was dying. Every laugh from Victoria's lips felt like mockery. Every time Marcus looked at her with adoration, I wanted to scream the truth at him, but I couldn't. Not here. Not on his wedding day. So I left early, claiming a headache that was actually a shattered heart, and cried myself to sleep on the couch, surrounded by packing boxes. 3 days later, they came to discuss the transition. That's what Victoria called it on the phone, the transition. As if my entire life being uprooted was just a business process, a logistical item on her checklist. They arrived at 10 in the morning. Marcus wouldn't look at me when he walked through the door. He kept his eyes on the floor, his hands shoved deep in his pockets like a guilty child. Victoria, however, walked in with the confidence of someone who'd already won. She carried a leather portfolio and wore a crisp white blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd rocked Marcus to sleep when he had nightmares, where we'd opened Christmas presents, where James and I had slow danced on our anniversary. Now it felt like foreign territory, like I was the intruder in my own home. Victoria didn't waste time with pleasantries. She opened her portfolio and pulled out several printed documents. "Celine, we need to discuss the timeline for your move. We think 30 days is reasonable. That gives you enough time to find an apartment and arrange movers." My mouth went dry. 30 days? "Yes, we've already contacted a realtor, Jennifer Hartman. She's excellent. And she believes we can list the property by mid-June. The market is extremely hot right now. Houses in this neighborhood are selling within days, often above asking price. This property, with its original features and lot size, Could easily fetch 600,000, possibly more with the right staging. I felt like I'd been slapped. You're going to sell it. Of course we're selling it, Victoria said, looking at me like I was simple-minded. Celine, this house is valuable, but it's not practical for our lifestyle. Marcus and I have decided to purchase a modern condo downtown, closer to our offices. This place is charming in a nostalgic way, but it's old-fashioned. The kitchen needs updating, the bathrooms are outdated, and frankly, we prefer contemporary design. I turned to Marcus, searching his face for some sign of the boy I'd raised, the man who'd cried when we scattered his father's ashes, who'd promised he'd always take care of me. Marcus, this was your childhood home. This is where your father— Mom, it just makes sense financially, he interrupted, finally meeting my eyes for a brief, painful moment before looking away again. Victoria's right. We can invest the money, buy something better suited to our needs. Maybe in a few years, when we're more established, we'll buy something bigger. But right now, this is the smart move. Better? Better than the home where I'd raised him alone, working myself to exhaustion? Better than the walls that held every memory of his father? My throat closed up, making it hard to speak. You're going to erase your entire childhood for money? Victoria's expression hardened. It's not a childhood home anymore, Celine. It's a financial asset. And frankly, we need the capital more than we need sentimentality. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Victoria's words playing on an endless loop in my mind. We need the capital more than we need sentimentality. Need the capital. Those 3 words wouldn't let me rest. Marcus had a stable job as a senior accountant at a respected firm, making good money. Victoria was supposedly a successful real estate agent with her own client base. Why would they be so desperate for cash that they'd sell a $500,000 house immediately after receiving it as a gift? Something didn't add up. At 3 in the morning, I got out of bed and made coffee, sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop. I started searching for Victoria's name online, looking at her real estate listings, her professional profile, anything that might explain this urgency. By dawn, I'd found several red flags. Her listings had dropped dramatically over the past year. The professional reviews on her agency page showed a pattern of complaints about aggressive tactics and pushy behavior. One review mentioned that she'd pressured an elderly client into selling their home far below market value. But I needed more information, something concrete. I called David Chen, Marcus's college roommate and best friend who worked in finance. David had always been kind to me, and I knew he'd stayed in touch with Marcus over the years. David, it's Celine. I'm sorry to call so early, but I need to ask you something about Marcus. Has he mentioned any financial problems? There was a long, uncomfortable pause on the other end of the line. Celine, I probably shouldn't say anything. Please, David. I'm his mother. If he's in trouble, I need to know. I heard him exhale slowly. Okay, but this stays between us. Victoria's been pushing Marcus hard to invest in some high-risk real estate development deals. She's convinced him they'll make a fortune. But honestly, Celine, they sound sketchy to me. I tried warning him, but he's completely under her spell. My stomach nodded. What kind of deals? Flipping properties mostly. But here's the thing. Victoria's got serious financial problems. I heard through some industry contacts that she was involved in a development project that went south about 2 years ago. She was partners with another investor, and they borrowed heavily. The project failed, and now she's buried in debt. Her business partner has been threatening to sue her for his losses. She needs a massive cash infusion, or she could face legal consequences, maybe even bankruptcy. The room started spinning. So Marcus isn't the target. The house is. I'm afraid so, David said quietly. Look, I don't know all the details, but from what I've gathered, Victoria targeted Marcus specifically because she knew about the house. She researched him before they even started dating. Found out his mom owned valuable property free and clear. I think she saw an opportunity and took it. My hands, trembled as I gripped the phone. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a calculated con. Victoria had manipulated my son, seduced him, married him, all to get her hands on my home so she could liquidate it and save her failing career. "There's one more thing," David added hesitantly. "I ran into them at a restaurant last month. Victoria was on her phone arguing with someone about money. She said, 'Once we flip the old lady's house, I'll have your money. Just give me 3 months.'" Marcus looked miserable, but he didn't say anything. He just sat there while she talked about your home like it was already hers to sell. After hanging up with David, I sat in stunned silence as morning light crept through my kitchen windows. I'd been completely outmaneuvered by a woman who'd studied me like a mark, who'd identified my weakness, my love for my son, and exploited it ruthlessly. After my conversation with David, I couldn't stay in the kitchen. I wandered through the house like a ghost, eventually finding myself in Marcus's old bedroom. The walls were still painted the blue he'd chosen when he turned 12. His old bed frame stood empty, stripped of sheets but still holding the indent of countless nights I'd tucked him in, read him stories, chased away his nightmares after James died. I sank to the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes filled with his childhood. My hands trembled as I pulled items out one by one. His report cards, straight A's he'd worked so hard for, his Little League trophy from the championship game where I'd screamed myself hoarse cheering from the bleachers, drawings he'd made me for Mother's Day, crayon portraits of the two of us holding hands with hearts floating above our heads, and words scrawled in uneven letters, "Best mom in the world. Best mom in the world." The irony crushed me. I found his baby book, the pages yellowed but the memories preserved. His first word, "Mama." His first steps, 10 months old, stumbling toward me across this very floor. His first day of school, crying and clinging to my leg until I promised I'd be waiting right there when he got out. The photographs blurred as tears streamed down my face. I remembered the night James died, how I'd held 8-year-old Marcus in this room while he sobbed, his small body shaking against mine. "Is Daddy really never coming back?" he'd asked, and I'd stroked his hair and made him a promise. "I will never leave you. I will always take care of you, I promise." I'd kept that promise. God, how I'd kept it. I remembered the double shifts at the diner, serving coffee with a smile while my feet screamed in pain. I remembered scrubbing hospital floors at midnight, my back aching, my hands cracked and bleeding from harsh chemicals. Thinking about Marcus asleep at home and pushing through because he needed new school clothes, or soccer cleats, or college application fees. I remembered the times I went hungry so he could have seconds at dinner, the times I wore the same coat for 5 winters so he could have a warm one, the times I canceled my own doctor's appointments because his braces were more important than my health. Every sacrifice played through my mind like a movie. Every missed opportunity, every delayed dream, every moment I chose him over myself. And for what? So he could hand me over to a woman who called me pathetic? So he could sit silently while his wife talked about selling my home like it was a stock to trade? I looked at myself in Marcus's old mirror, the same mirror where he'd practiced tying his tie before prom, where he'd checked his appearance before his first job interview. The woman staring back at me looked ancient. Gray hair wild around a face creased with years of worry. Eyes red and swollen from crying. Hands gnarled from decades of hard labor. I looked like exactly what Victoria had called me. An old lady. Disposable. Easy to manipulate. Pathetic. The sobs came from somewhere deep and primal, a keening wail that echoed through the empty house. I'd given everything. My youth, my health, my dreams, my entire life, and in return, I was being discarded like garbage. I called Clara, barely able to form words through my crying. He chose her, Clara. He chose money over me. After everything I gave up. Clara's voice was fierce, cutting through my despair. Then make him regret it, Celine. Make them both regret it. I woke up the next morning on Marcus's bedroom floor, my body stiff from sleeping in an awkward position, my face swollen from hours of crying. Sunlight streamed through the window, harsh and unforgiving, illuminating the scattered boxes and childhood memories around me. For a moment, I felt the weight of despair trying to pull me back down into that dark place of helpless grief. But then Clara's words echoed in my mind. Make them both regret it. I pushed myself up off the floor, my knees protesting, and walked to the bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked like she'd been through a war, and maybe I had been. But as I stared at my reflection, something shifted inside me. The victim looking back at me began to transform into something else, something harder, something fierce. I splashed cold water on my face, again and again, until the puffiness began to subside and I could see clearly. I gripped the edges of the sink and leaned forward, looking myself directly in the eyes. No more crying, I whispered to my reflection. No more playing the victim. I thought about everything I'd survived. Losing James hadn't destroyed me. I'd raised a child alone and kept a roof over our heads. Poverty hadn't broken me. I'd worked 3 jobs and still found the strength to smile. Exhaustion hadn't defeated me. I'd pushed through pain and kept going when quitting would have been easier. I was a fighter. I'd always been a fighter. I'd just forgotten it somewhere along the way. Buried that warrior, woman under years of trying to be soft and accommodating and grateful for whatever scraps of love people threw my way. But Victoria had made a critical mistake. She'd assumed that because I was old, I was weak. She'd assumed that because I was kind, I was stupid. She'd assumed that because I loved my son, I'd let myself be destroyed without a fight. She was wrong. I left the bathroom and went to my bedroom, opening the closet where I kept my important documents. I pulled out the folder containing the deed transfer, studying it carefully for the first time since signing it. I'd been so eager to give Marcus everything that I hadn't read the fine print, hadn't protected myself, hadn't even thought I'd need to. But it was done. The house was legally theirs. Or was it? I grabbed a notepad and started making a list, my hand steady now, my mind clear. First, I needed to understand my legal options. Second, I needed evidence of Victoria's true intentions. Third, I needed to find out exactly what kind of trouble she was in and how deep Marcus had been pulled into her schemes. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Margaret Winters, a family law attorney who'd retired 3 years ago. We'd been friends for over a decade, meeting at the senior center where we both volunteered. Margaret was sharp, fierce, and had spent 40 years fighting for people who'd been taken advantage of by their own families. I pressed call, and she answered on the second ring. Margaret, it's Celine. I need your help, and I need you to keep this completely confidential. She must have heard something in my voice, the steel that had replaced the softness, because her tone shifted immediately to all business. Tell me everything. I did. I told her about the wedding gift, about Victoria's phone call, about the planned sale, about David's revelations regarding Victoria's financial troubles. I laid out every detail while Margaret listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then Margaret said 7 words that ignited hope in my chest. Celine, you're not out of options yet. For the first time in days, I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who just decided to stop being prey and start being a predator. Margaret came to my house that same afternoon, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the sharp, no-nonsense expression I remembered from her days in the courtroom. We sat at my kitchen table, and she spread out the deed transfer documents, studying every line with the precision of a surgeon examining a patient. Okay, here's what we're dealing with, she said after 20 minutes of silent review. The deed transfer is legal and binding. However, there are some factors working in your favor because you gifted this house without Victoria contributing any marital funds and because there was a verbal agreement. which I assume you mentioned to others, that you'd continue living here until you chose to leave, we have potential grounds for a legal challenge. My heart leapt. You mean I can fight this? Possibly. We could argue undue influence, elder financial exploitation, or even fraud if we can prove Victoria intentionally deceived you about their intentions. But here's the problem. Court cases are expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. Even if we won, it could take years. My hope deflated like a punctured balloon, so I'm trapped. I didn't say that. Margaret leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with the strategic intelligence that had made her legendary in family court. I said court is one option, but there might be a smarter way. Tell me, does Victoria know that you know about her plans? No, I haven't confronted her or Marcus. I've been pretending everything is fine. Good, keep it that way. Here's what I'm thinking. We don't go to court yet. Instead, we gather evidence. Lots of evidence. Let them think they've completely fooled you. Let them believe you're just a naive old woman who'll move out quietly. Meanwhile, you document everything. Every conversation, every text message, every phone call. Get proof of their real intentions. How do I do that? Margaret pulled a small device from her briefcase. This is a voice-activated recorder. It's legal to record conversations you're part of in this state. Keep it in your purse during every interaction with Victoria or Marcus. Save every text, every email. Create a paper trail that proves they defrauded you. I took the recorder, feeling its weight in my palm. What else? I have a colleague, a private investigator named Robert Chen. He specializes in financial investigations. If Victoria is in as much trouble as your source suggested, there will be a trail. Failed business deals, angry creditors, legal threats. We find that evidence, and suddenly, we have leverage. Over the next week, Robert worked his magic. What he uncovered was devastating and perfect. Victoria wasn't just in debt, she was involved in multiple questionable real estate transactions. There were 3 elderly homeowners who'd filed complaints with the State Real Estate Commission, claiming Victoria had used high-pressure tactics and misleading information to convince them to sell their properties below market value. One case was still under investigation, but the most explosive discovery was her business partner, a man named Richard Foster, who was preparing to sue her for $300,000 in losses from their failed development project. Robert found email exchanges between Victoria and Richard where she explicitly promised to secure family assets to pay him back. She'd written, "My husband's mother is signing over a property worth $500K. Once we flip it, you'll get your money." I was mentioned by name. I was always part of her plan. Robert also discovered something else. Victoria had been researching Marcus online for months before they ever met. She'd found articles about his promotion at work, saw photos of him at charity events, and even located my property records through public databases. She'd engineered their chance meeting at a networking event she knew he'd attend. It was premeditated, calculated, cold-blooded. But I had one more card to play, something Victoria couldn't possibly know about. 3 months before Marcus announced his engagement, I'd undertaken a small renovation project. I told Marcus I was updating some insulation in the walls. What I'd actually done was create a hidden compartment behind the built-in bookshelf in the master bedroom. Inside that compartment, I'd placed my most valuable possessions, my grandmother's jewelry collection, including a diamond brooch and pearl necklace worth over $50,000, my late husband's rare coin collection, valued at $150,000 by an appraiser, family heirlooms, vintage documents, and precious items I'd been saving for Marcus's future children. Victoria had no idea they existed. The house appraisal she'd seen didn't include them. When she sold the house, those items would still be in the walls, and legally they belonged to me, not to the property. The closing date approached like a storm on the horizon, June 15th, exactly 6 weeks after the wedding. Victoria had found buyers quickly, just as she'd predicted. A young couple named the Hendersons, both doctors, eager to start their family in a charming neighborhood with good schools. They were offering $620,000, well above asking price, and Victoria was practically glowing with triumph every time I saw her. I'd moved most of my belongings into a small storage unit, playing the role of the compliant old woman perfectly. I'd even let Victoria help me look at apartments, nodding sadly at each cramped space while she made comments about downsizing and simplifying my life. Marcus had stopped by twice, guilt written all over his face, but he never questioned the sale. He'd chosen his path. Margaret and I had worked out every detail of our plan. The final walkthrough was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock. Everyone would be there. The Hendersons, their realtor Susan Martinez, Victoria, Marcus, and the title company representative who'd oversee the final paperwork. It was standard procedure, one last check before signing. I'd asked, with convincing trembling in my voice, if I could attend to say goodbye to the house one last time. Victoria had rolled her eyes but agreed, probably thinking I'd make some emotional scene that wouldn't matter anyway since the papers were already drawn up. What Victoria didn't know was that I'd called the Hendersons 2 days earlier, introducing myself as the previous owner. Mrs. Henderson, Amy, had been warm and kind on the phone. "Mrs. Chen, it's lovely to hear from you. We're so excited about the house. It has such character. I'm glad it's going to a family who'll love it," I'd said, my voice sincere. I wanted to mention something, though. My late husband was a contractor, and he was quite meticulous about his work. Sometimes he'd leave notes or small items in the walls during construction. Time capsules, he called them. You might want to check behind the built-in bookshelf in the master bedroom before you finalize everything, just to make sure there's no structural damage or anything hidden that should be disclosed. Amy had been intrigued. "That's fascinating. We'll definitely take a look. Thank you for letting us know." I'd also made 3 other crucial calls. First to Margaret, confirming she'd be there with her briefcase full of evidence. Second to Robert, the private investigator, who'd compiled everything into a devastating report. And third, this was the masterstroke, to Detective Sarah Ramirez from the Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Ramirez had been investigating Victoria for months based on complaints from other elderly victims. She'd been waiting for enough evidence to make an arrest. When I'd contacted her through Margaret and shared our findings, including the recorded conversations and email evidence Robert had obtained through legal means, she'd been very interested. "Mrs. Chen, if everything you're telling me checks out, we have grounds for charges of elder financial abuse and real estate fraud. I'd like to be present at this walkthrough if you don't mind. Just as an observer, of course." "Of course, Detective. I think you'll find it very educational." Saturday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine, as if the universe itself wanted to illuminate the truth. I dressed carefully in a simple floral dress, styling my gray hair neatly, looking every bit the harmless elderly woman Victoria believed me to be. I tucked the voice recorder into my purse, checked that my phone was fully charged, and took one last look around my kitchen. By 1:30, I was ready. Margaret picked me up in her silver sedan, and we drove to the house together. Detective Ramirez would arrive separately, posing as a building inspector doing a routine check, something the Hendersons had supposedly requested. As we pulled into the driveway, I saw Victoria's BMW already parked there, along with Marcus's car and an unfamiliar vehicle that must belong to the Hendersons. Margaret squeezed my hand. "You ready for this?" I took a deep breath, feeling decades of anger, pain, and determination crystallize into cold, clear purpose. I've never been more ready for anything in my life. We walked into my house, though it no longer felt like mine, and found everyone gathered in the living room. Victoria stood near the fireplace in a designer pantsuit, gesturing animatedly as she talked to the Hendersons about the investment potential of the neighborhood. Marcus sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone, looking uncomfortable. Susan Martinez, the buyer's realtor, was reviewing paperwork at the dining table, and the title company representative was setting up his laptop. "Celine!" Victoria's voice was syrupy sweet, dripping with false sympathy. We didn't think you'd actually come. This must be so difficult for you." I wanted to say a proper goodbye, I said softly, playing my part perfectly. Amy Henderson approached me with genuine warmth, taking my hands in hers. "Mrs. Chen, thank you so much for this beautiful home. We promise to take good care of it, and thank you for that tip about checking behind the bookshelf. We'd like to take a look before we finalize everything, if that's okay." Victoria's smile faltered for just a second. "What bookshelf?" "The built-in one in the master bedroom," Amy's husband, James, explained. "Mrs. Chen mentioned her late husband sometimes left things in the walls during construction. We just want to make sure there's no structural damage before we sign." "That's completely unnecessary," Victoria said quickly, her voice tight. "The house has been thoroughly inspected. Everything is fine." "Still, we'd like to check," Amy insisted politely but firmly. "It'll only take a minute." Victoria looked at Marcus, who shrugged helplessly. She had no choice but to agree without looking suspicious. We all moved upstairs to the master bedroom, a strange parade of people who'd soon witness everything unravel. The built-in bookshelf stood against the wall, exactly as it had for 30 years. James Henderson was already examining it, running his hands along the edges. "Help me move this," he said to Marcus. Together, they pulled the heavy bookshelf away from the wall, revealing the small access panel behind it. James opened the panel and Amy leaned in with her phone's flashlight. Her gasp echoed through the room. "Oh my God! James, there are boxes in here, sealed boxes!" My heart hammered in my chest as James carefully pulled out the first waterproof container, then another, and another. 3 boxes total, each one I'd placed there months ago. Victoria's face had gone pale. "What is that?" Amy opened the first box and her eyes widened. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, were my grandmother's jewelry pieces, the diamond brooch glittering under the light, pearl necklaces, gold bracelets. The second box contained my husband's rare coin collection, each coin in its protective case. The third held family documents, vintage photographs, and other heirlooms. "This is incredible," James breathed. "This must be worth a fortune." Victoria found her voice sharp and panicked. "Those belong to the house. They're part of the property. They stay with the sale." "Actually," I said quietly, and every head turned toward me, "they belong to me. Those are my family heirlooms, placed there for safekeeping. They were never part of the house sale." "You can't just," Victoria started, but I cut her off. "I can, and I have documentation proving ownership." I pulled out my phone, where I'd stored photographs of each item with dated appraisals. "But that's not really what this is about, is it, Victoria?" Her eyes narrowed dangerously. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my purse and pulled out the voice recorder, holding it up for everyone to see. "I'm talking about the phone call you made at the wedding reception. The one where you said, and I quote, 'The old lady signed everything over. We can list it next month. She has absolutely no idea what's happening.'" The room went silent. Marcus's face drained of color. I pressed play. Victoria's voice filled the bedroom, cold and calculating. "She has absolutely no idea. These old people are so easy to manipulate. That house is our nest egg, our investment opportunity." Victoria lunged for the recorder, but Margaret stepped between us. "I wouldn't do that. That's evidence." "Evidence of what?" Victoria snarled, her polished mask completely shattered now. "Elder financial abuse, real estate fraud, conspiracy to defraud." The voice came from the doorway. Detective Ramirez stepped into the room, holding up her badge. "Victoria Chen, I'm Detective Sarah Ramirez with the Financial Crimes Unit. We've been investigating you for several months based on complaints from multiple elderly victims." Victoria's face twisted with rage and fear. She whirled on Marcus, her voice rising to a scream. "You said your mother was too senile to fight back. You said she was a naive old fool who'd never figure it out. You promised me this would be easy." The room erupted. Amy gasped. Marcus stood frozen, his face a mask of horror, as he realized what Victoria had just admitted, and that I'd heard every word. The aftermath unfolded like a perfectly choreographed play where justice finally took center stage. The house sale was immediately canceled, the title company representative declaring the transaction void pending investigation. Amy and James Henderson backed away from the deal entirely, though Amy hugged me before leaving and whispered, "I'm so sorry this happened to you. You're incredibly brave." Victoria was arrested 3 days later at her office, led out in handcuffs while her colleagues watched in shock. The charges were extensive: elder financial abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violations of her real estate license. The State Real Estate Commission revoked her license permanently. Robert's investigation had uncovered 2 additional victims willing to testify, elderly homeowners Victoria had manipulated using similar tactics. Combined with the recorded evidence and email trails showing her premeditated plan to target Marcus specifically for his family assets, the prosecutor had an airtight case. 6 months later, Victoria was sentenced to 8 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all her victims. Her business partner Richard's lawsuit moved forward, ensuring she'd emerge from prison with nothing but debt and a criminal record. Everything she'd schemed for, every manipulation she'd carefully crafted, had backfired spectacularly. Marcus's fall was different but equally devastating. His firm, a conservative accounting company that valued integrity above all else, launched an internal investigation into whether he'd knowingly participated in fraud. Though they found no evidence he'd broken any laws, the scandal destroyed his reputation. Clients requested new accountants. Colleagues avoided him in the hallways. Within 3 months, he was asked to resign. He came to me one October evening, 6 months after the walkthrough, looking like he'd aged a decade. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped, his expensive suit hanging loose on a frame that had lost considerable weight. He stood on the porch of my new cottage, a charming place near Clara, with a garden twice the size of my old one, and broke down completely. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." He sobbed like the 8-year-old boy who'd cried in my arms when his father died. "I let her manipulate me. I convinced myself it was just business, that you'd be fine, that we deserved the money. I betrayed everything you taught me. I betrayed you." I stood in the doorway looking at my son, this broken man who'd chosen greed over love and was now paying the price. Part of me wanted to hold him, to comfort him, to tell him everything would be okay, like I'd done his entire life. But another part of me, the part that had been forged in the fire of his betrayal, knew that real love sometimes means letting people face the consequences of their choices. Marcus. I've thought a lot about forgiveness these past months. I've talked to therapists, to Clara, to my pastor, and here's what I've learned. I can forgive you eventually, but I can't forget what you were willing to do to me. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to believe I was disposable. "I know," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I know, and it's killing me." "Good. It should." My voice was firm but not cruel. "You need to sit with that pain. You need to understand what you almost did. I'm not closing the door on our relationship forever, but I'm not opening it right now either. You need to figure out who you are without Victoria's influence, without anyone's influence. You need to rebuild yourself from the ground up." "What do I do?" he asked, his voice breaking. "You go to therapy. You make amends where you can. You rebuild your career with integrity. You become the man your father would have been proud of, the man I raised you to be. And maybe, someday, when you've proven through actions, not words, that you've changed, we can start rebuilding what was broken." I handed him a piece of paper with a therapist's name and number. "This is someone who specializes in family reconciliation and personal accountability. Call her. Do the work. And Marcus?" I waited until he met my eyes. "I do still love you, but love doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior. Love means having high enough standards to demand better. He took the paper with shaking hands, nodded, and walked back to his car. I watched him drive away, my heart aching but my spine straight. I'd reclaimed my home, my dignity, and most importantly, my power. As I sit in my new garden on this crisp autumn evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I think about how close I came to losing everything. Not just the house, though that mattered, but my dignity, my self-worth, my sense of who I was. I almost let them erase me, reduce me to nothing more than an obstacle to be removed. A naive old woman too sentimental to understand the real world of money and investments. The tomato plants I transplanted from my old garden are thriving here. Their descendants still producing fruit from the seeds James planted decades ago. Some things endure, no matter how many times they're uprooted. Some legacies refuse to die. Mrs. Patterson visits twice a week now, making the drive to have tea and gossip on my new porch. Clara lives just 10 minutes away, and we've become closer than we've been in years. I've started volunteering at a senior legal aid clinic, helping other elderly people recognize the signs of financial abuse before it's too late. I share my story, not with shame, but with purpose. If my pain can protect even one person from similar betrayal, then it means something. The heirlooms I recovered are safely stored in a bank vault now, waiting for Marcus to truly change, waiting for potential grandchildren who might someday appreciate their heritage, waiting for a future I can't yet see, but still hope for. I've learned something profound through this nightmare. Greed destroys families faster and more completely than any disease. It turns children against parents, spouses into enemies, homes into commodities to be liquidated. It blinds people to what truly matters: the love, the memories, the irreplaceable connections that make life worth living. Marcus forgot that the greatest inheritance isn't property or money. It's integrity. It's the ability to look at yourself in the mirror and respect the person looking back. It's knowing that you honored your commitments, protected the people who sacrificed for you, and chose character over convenience. Those things can't be bought, sold, or traded. They can only be given freely or lost completely. Victoria learned too late that you can't build a life on lies and manipulation. Every scheme eventually collapses. Every victim eventually finds their voice. Every predator eventually faces consequences. Justice may not come quickly, but it comes. And me? I learned that I'm so much stronger than I ever knew. I learned that being kind doesn't mean being weak, that being old doesn't mean being helpless, and that love sometimes means setting boundaries so firm they feel like walls. I learned that I deserve respect, dignity, and honesty, and that I'm willing to fight for those things, even when it means standing alone against my own son. The greatest victory wasn't keeping the house or recovering the heirlooms or seeing Victoria arrested. The greatest victory was reclaiming myself. If you're watching this and you've ever felt taken advantage of by family members, please hear me. You are not powerless. You are not too old, too trusting, or too loving to protect yourself. Document everything. Keep records of conversations. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if people tell you you're being paranoid. Seek legal help. There are resources available, even if you think you can't afford them. Senior legal aid clinics exist in most cities. Elder abuse hotlines are staffed with people who understand. You are not alone. And never, ever, let anyone convince you that your sacrifices make you disposable. You matter. Your story matters. Your worth isn't determined by what you can give others. It's inherent, unchangeable, and yours to protect. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't to forgive and forget. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is to stand up, speak truth, and save yourself. Now I want to hear from you. Put yourself in my position for a moment. What would you have done when you overheard that phone call at the wedding? Would you have confronted them immediately, or would you have gathered evidence like I did? Do you think I was too hard on Marcus? Or not hard enough? And here's the biggest question. If your own child betrayed you for money, could you ever truly forgive them? Share your honest thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your perspectives help others who might be facing similar situations. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics or inspired you to protect yourself or someone you love, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they think. And subscribe to this channel for more real stories about family, betrayal, resilience, and justice. Remember, you're not a victim unless you choose to stay one. You're a survivor the moment you decide to fight back. Thank you for listening to my story, for sitting with me through the pain and the triumph. Until next time, stay strong, trust yourself, and never apologize for demanding the respect you deserve. Your story isn't over. Sometimes it's just beginning.